All right. Hi, folks. How's everyone doing today? You are going to be muted and cameras off during this presentation. That way we can get through all of the content within the hour allotted for this. And I wanted to have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A if anyone has any questions that we want to talk about or address. After the presentation, we'll go ahead and do that. Otherwise, if you think of a question you want to throw it in the chat, Mike Myron with our marketing team is also on the call, and he can kind of field those and address them immediately if he can. Otherwise, we'll just kind of keep those questions for the end of the presentation, and then that way we can again stay on time with this. This is a 1 hour code, non-commercial code presentation. The content that we'll be going over is going to be related to two-way emergency communication systems for rescue assistance. So we'll definitely start at a high level, just kind of addressing the systems, talking about them, and get a little bit more into the weeds later on the code as far as what codes are requiring these systems and when they're required, so on and so forth. So we'll go ahead and get started here in about a minute. We'll let the final few join in here, and we'll try to start here on time around 11 a.m. And then hopefully everyone will have a lot of questions for the end, and we can have a good discussion so everyone can learn something and learn from each other. And yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started here now that we are at the top of the hour. So my name is Rob Chimperly. I am the Senior Regional Territory Sales Manager for Wrath by Avire. If you aren't familiar with Wrath by Avire, we are a systems manufacturer. We manufacture components for emergency communication systems. Obviously, today we'll be talking about two-way emergency communication systems for rescue assistance, which we manufacture right here in Sussex, Wisconsin. We also manufacture a lot of code-regulated products in the elevator world as well. So elevator phones, visual two-way communication systems for in elevator cars, also door detectors, so the elevator doors don't close on you, and sensors so that they won't close if someone's in the way of that door in the elevator, as well as public safety and security products, which mainly we sell in the transit industry, but also a lot of blue light emergency phones for parking garages and higher education, colleges, that sort of thing for blue light emergency phones, as well as a lot of municipalities and even like hospital parking lots and things like that are common applications for our blue light phones and our other public safety products. And then cellular communicators, we're continuing to advance that product as cellular technology advances. So we have some really cool products coming out now, but mainly voice communication, cellular communication products to convert any of the analog communication systems for emergencies to cellular, so they can use cellular rather than having to rely on analog phone lines and that sort of thing. So we have a whole line of cellular, voice over IP, and cellular data communication products on that side as well. So we'll go ahead and get started with the code portion of the presentation. This is an approved AIA course. So if you are an AIA member or you're affiliated with an organization that seeks continuing education credits, this counts for one AIA credit in health, safety, and welfare. And at the end, I'll have a QR code that'll pop up on the last slide, and you're able to scan that and fill out a short evaluation, hopefully giving us some good feedback so we can continue to build out this presentation and this course. But also you'll have the opportunity there to list your AIA credentials and information so that we'll actually automatically log the CEUs on the AIA website. If you're affiliated with another organization and you need continuing education credits, you can also request a certificate of completion, which a lot of times that certificate of completion with the AIA stamp on it will be enough for you to submit for credit through other organizations that you might be a part of, so that you can get continuing education if you're not an AIA member. So the learning objectives, things we're going to be going over today. I'm going to address two-way emergency communication systems for rescue assistance, talk about what they are and kind of the reasoning for them, why they're in multiple story publicly accessible buildings. And then we'll talk about the codes and standards pertaining to those two-way communication systems, which mainly is in the IBC, which is also mirrored over in the IFC for the means of egress section, as well as NFPA 72, a little bit on NFPA 101. We'll address this new UL requirement. UL 2525 Edition 1 is the new standard for two-way communication systems for rescue assistance. So we'll be talking about that UL 2525 standard and compliance and really what a lot of those system requirements are. And then a little bit of ADA kind of scattered throughout, because obviously this product is for people with physical limitations, and so the American with Disabilities Act and accessibilities guidelines and that sort of thing definitely is applicable to this, and definitely an ADA concern. So we'll be addressing a lot of that throughout the presentation as well. We'll get into some scope and design, kind of some high level stuff as far as like the components and where components go in a building. And then we'll open it up for kind of the closing remarks and then a Q&A at the end. Like I said earlier, if you joined late, if you do have any questions, I just ask to either keep them for the end or you can put them in the chat, and Mike Myron with our marketing department is on the call and he can kind of field those as he can. Otherwise, we'll save them till the end, and that way we can kind of share the questions and then the answers with everybody so we can kind of learn from each other as well. So we'll go ahead and get started here with the content. And if anybody has any questions, just save those for the end. Appreciate it. So what is a two-way communication system? Well, during a fire alarm emergency, many of you know there's a sign next to the elevator. It says, in case of a fire or during a fire, don't use the exit stairway or don't use the elevator, use the stairs. Well, if you're unable to use the stairs, the elevators recall during that fire alarm emergency, and so you're unable to evacuate the building. And so in that case, you're going to be trapped on those floors above or below the level of exit discharge, which is obviously a means of egress issue during that fire alarm emergency. So the two-way communication system provides a designated location and then a means of communication so individuals can call for rescue assistance during that fire alarm emergency. So pretty much anybody that is unable to use the stairs to evacuate is going to be trapped in that building and will be utilizing this system to be able to call for rescue assistance. So it's not necessarily just people in wheelchairs, but also people that might use walkers or just people with any type of limitations that makes it unable for them to use the stairs to evacuate that building during a fire alarm emergency, like many of us would want to do during that fire alarm emergency. So where do the two-way communication systems go? Where are they located in the building? Well, we'll go over some of that in code, but mainly you're going to see these systems at the elevator landings on every floor above or below the level of exit discharge. Also, areas of refuge require a two-way communication system, as well as exterior areas for assisted rescue. So we'll kind of talk about when those locations are required, and each one of those locations do require a two-way communication system. We'll also talk a little bit about IBC 403, which is every fifth floor in the stairways, which also requires a two-way emergency communication system. So a little timeline, kind of how things have evolved over the years. There's been some significant changes as of recently, but really all this started in 1990 when the late George H.W. Bush signed the ADA into law. What this did is require that publicly accessible buildings be accessible to all individuals, whether they have physical limitations or not. So building that first floor to grade so a wheelchair can easily get into the building on that main floor, or adding wheelchair ramps so individuals can get to that in and out of that main floor of entry. And then, of course, elevators to get to floors above or below the level of exit discharge. But as we know, during a fire alarm emergency, these elevators recall. So, really, the main change happened in 2007 under the NFPA 72, which they started to determine that we need to have a two-way communication system in these multiple story buildings, whether they're sprinklered or not. In the past, there was always a sprinkler exception to needing any type of communication system. But now that's no longer the case. And as of 2009 IBC, these systems are required in every multiple story publicly accessible building. And we'll address those codes here in a little bit more specifically. In 2016, NFPA 72 started requiring survivability and system supervision, or monitoring the system for integrity for the two-way communication systems. And that was as of the 2016 NFPA 72. Most recently, the 2022 NFPA 72 came out, and they started to require UL 2525 compliance. So that's Edition 1 UL 2525, which is specifically written for two-way communication systems for rescue assistance. And we'll talk about what some of those requirements are here in a little bit. And then most recently, the 2024 IBC and NFPA 101 came out, and they are also referencing and requiring UL 2525 compliance. So everyone's getting on board with this UL 2525 requirement for two-way communication systems for rescue assistance. Now, depending on where you're located in the country, you're going to kind of follow the building codes that are in force in that area. So this is kind of a high-level map of what states have adopted which IBCs. But as we kind of talked about, every state in the country has adopted at least the 2012. So therefore, as of 2009, two-way communication systems for rescue assistance are a requirement. So therefore, every state in the country should be requiring these two-way communication systems per the codes. And we'll go over some of those codes here shortly. But really, every jurisdiction might be a little bit different. It's similar to fire alarm or other code requirements. So you definitely want to be in tune with your local authorities having jurisdiction if you're not just trying to follow the national requirements, because there may be areas that go above and beyond the current code that was adopted by that state at the local level. So we definitely want to make sure that we're meeting the requirements of those AHJs in those areas as well as those national codes from a high level. So IBC, we'll go ahead and jump in here. So a lot of the confusion for these systems stems from this section here, 1009.3.3, which says that stairways shall either incorporate an area of refuge within an enlarged floor level landing or shall be accessed from an area of refuge complying with the section below. Well, areas of refuge are not required at exit access stairways where two-way communication is provided within the elevator landings, or at the elevator landings, in accordance with 1009.8, which we'll get to that section here in a little bit. Also, areas of refuge are not required at stairways in buildings equipped throughout with an automatic sprinkler system. They don't require areas of refuge in open parking garages, open air assembly seating areas. Group R2 occupancies do not require areas of refuge, and areas of refuge are not required at the stairways where the refuge area it serves by an accessible means of egress. So in other words, if you have an adjacent room that will be an applicable or will be an approved area of refuge next to a stairwell, you don't need to have areas of refuge in that stairwell. You just need to have it one area of refuge per that accessible means of egress. If you are going to have areas of refuge, they need to have proper size. So the size of that area needs to be able to have a wheelchair space 30 by 52 for every 200 occupants on that floor. And so it needs to be an enlarged stairwell landing for it to be an approved area of refuge. You can't be blocking the means of egress for other building occupants. Also, the areas of refuge need to be provided with a two-way communication system. So The areas of refuge themselves, as you can tell, have quite a few exceptions. So we're not seeing as many areas of refuge anymore because most of these multiple story publicly accessible buildings are equipped throughout an automatic sprinkler system. But if we do have areas of refuge, we need to provide them with signage as well. So you need to have the proper space, you need to have the two-way communication system, and then you need to have three signs, really. One sign that designates it as an area of refuge with the international symbol of accessibility, and then the sign needs to be illuminated if the exit sign's illuminated, which typically they are. So an illuminated area of refuge sign with the international symbol of accessibility outside the door leading to the area of refuge, which is typically the stairwell. And then visual characters, raised characters, and braille signage adjacent to the door leading to the area of refuge. And then also a location and instruction sign next to the call box within that area of refuge. So three signs for areas of refuge. But again, these physical areas of refuge are not required in fully sprinkler buildings. So typically we're deferring to 1009.8, which says that a two-way communication system complying with the section below shall be provided at the landing serving each elevator or bank of elevators on each accessible floor that is one or more stories above or below the level of exit discharge. The only exception to that is the two-way communication systems are not required at the landing serving each elevator or bank of elevators, where the two-way communication system is provided within areas of refuge. So you need to have either areas of refuge that meet all that criteria with a two-way communication system, or you need to have two-way communication at the elevator or bank of elevators on each accessible floor that is one or more stories above or below exit discharge. They are not required. No two-way communication system is required on floors provided with ramps. If someone can exit that building on their own using a wheelchair, ADA approved wheelchair ramp, then you want them to do that as soon as possible and not waiting at a call box for rescue assistance. So floors provided with ramps don't require them. They don't require the two-way communication system at the service elevators, the freight elevators, or the private residence elevator locations. So it's just the passenger elevators or the passenger banks of elevators that require the call box on those floors above or below exit discharge. They also added in 2018 IBC group I2 and I3 facilities are exempt from needing two-way communication. I say when applicable here because for one, it wasn't adopted till 18, but also a lot of HJs aren't pushing this exception because as we know, I2s, that's going to be your hospitals, and hospitals have a lot of people with physical limitations. So I think a lot of HJs feel like we still need to have that system in place even in hospitals, even though the ICC determined that they're not necessary because there's evacuation plans in place for all building occupants during a fire alarm emergency. But that's kind of up for debate there, but it is in the code as of 2018 stating that those occupancies do not require the two-way communication system for rescue assistance. Now, every other occupancy with one floor above or below exit discharge, or basically if it has an elevator, it requires the system, uh, requires a system that has two-way communication provided between each required location, so your call box locations, and then the fire command center central control point location approved by the fire department. So it's going to be your call boxes calling down to your base station, the location of the base station approved by the fire department. So this is where the ICC determined the fire department is your authority having jurisdiction in this case. Where that central control point is not at a constantly attended location, then the two-way communication system shall have a timed automatic dial-out capability that provides two-way communication with an approved supervising station or emergency services. So typically these systems are connected to a means of communication outside the building, and then they typically call to a monitoring company that's going to answer that call 24/7. The two-way communication system needs to have both audible and visible signals. So the monitoring company will actually have to pick up the phone and speak with this individual and then dispatch accordingly. This isn't going to be like a fire alarm system where it's just sending a data signal. This is two-way voice communication with that emergency services or supervising station. And then as of the 2024 IBC, systems shall be listed in accordance with UL 2525 and installed in accordance with NFPA 72. So that little sentence there about UL 2525 is new to 2024. If you're previous to 2024, which most states are, then all of the other information I went over applies except for that UL compliance. Now, they also want to make sure that we have that same location and instruction sign next to the call box for the elevator lobby location. So directions for the use of the two-way communication system, instructions for summoning assistance via the two-way communication system, and then written identification location needs to be posted adjacent to the two-way communication system. So that's a location instruction sign goes next to the call box in the elevator lobby locations. All of the other signage requirements that I went over earlier, those apply only to areas of refuge. They do not require all of those signs for elevator lobby locations, mainly because that's your general means of entry and egress out of the building anyways, if you can't use the stairs. So the fire alarm system goes off, you go to the elevator lobby, realize the elevators have recalled, you can't use them. And at that point, there'll be a call box with an instruction sign next to it. And that typically will suffice. But again, it's up to the AHJ. A lot of AHJs are still interpreting those signage requirements from area of refuge and applying them to the elevator lobbies. So we want to be cognizant of that there may be further requirements for signage per the AHJ. Now, just to kind of turn the page a little bit, another applicable two-way communication system is the Stairway communication system listed in IBC 403. And it says that a telephone or other two-way communication system connected to an approved constantly attended station shall be provided at not less than every fifth floor in each stairway where the doors to the stairway are locked. So that means if you have, say, access control in your stairwell doors, and there's a chance of you, say, on the 20th floor walking into the stairwell, being like, oh, I'm on the 20th floor, I don't want to take the stairs, and the door locks behind you, so now you're trapped in that stairwell. Your only option is to go down 20 flights of stairs to get yourselves out of the stairwell. Or, in this case, per code, there should be a call box on at least every fifth floor. So now you can just say, go down 2 flights of stairs, there's a call box, you can call for assistance out of the stairwell. This is not for people that can't use the stairs. This is for people that can and will, but maybe shouldn't and are unable to traverse 20 flights of stairs. So therefore, we have a call box on at least every fifth floor. The reason why we talk about this system in the presentation is because a lot of times this system is integrated with the rescue assistance system at the elevator lobbies. So you'd still have that on every floor above or below exit discharge at your elevator locations, but then also on every fifth floor in the stairwells to accomplish this requirement. This is also a system under the 2024 IBC that they want to have UL 2525 compliant. So it definitely applies to this system as well as the area of refuge systems and elevator landing two-way communication systems. In fact, they list that right here, stating that systems used for area of refuge emergency communication systems, and this is NFPA 72, the 2022 version. A lot of these are new requirements under 2022. But systems used for area of refuge emergency communication systems, stairway communication systems, elevator landing communication systems, and occupant evacuation elevator lobby communication systems shall be listed in accordance with applicable standards, such as UL 2525, two-way emergency communication system for rescue assistance. So this is basically stating that whether these systems are at areas of refuge and stairwells, elevator lobbies, it doesn't matter. These are all systems for rescue assistance, and they all need to meet these standards and code requirements per UL 2525 and NFPA 72. So this is a good step in the right direction to clarify confusion between what's the requirement when it's an area of refuge system, what's the requirement when it's elevator lobby communication system. Well, it's the same requirements as far as NFPA 72 is concerned. You need to have remotely located communication stations, a master control station, and then a primary and secondary power supply or battery backup for the system. When the remote stations are activated by a building occupant, a two-way live voice communication shall be required to operate between the remote station and then a constantly attended location. The master control station shall be installed within a central control point in the building, or as we talked about earlier, location approved by the fire department or the authority having jurisdiction. If the central control point is not constantly attended in the building, then as we talked about, we need to have a timed automatic communications capability connect to an off-premises constantly attended monitoring location approved by the AHJ, where trained personnel can initiate the appropriate response. And as far as training is concerned, there's not a lot of training that's needed, but that's typically left up to the contractor when they're placing their test calls to just make sure like this is how you operate the system. This is what you need to do in case of an emergency. And hopefully the monitoring company is educating their new people as well. In the event of an off-premises connection, the two-way communication system needs to have the capability of transmitting a verbal signal to identify the specific building address and the location of that remote call box. So that's going to be a location message, for example, that's going to play, you are receiving a rescue assistance two-way communication call from 888 Central Avenue, 13th floor, elevator lobby. For two-way communication, press any key. They touch a key on their touchtone and it opens up two-way voice communication. They can now relay to dispatch that we have someone on the 13th floor elevator lobby that needs help getting out of the building. And obviously their first responders can go to the base station and see the location of that call coming in as well and go directly to that person and help them out of the building. And that's kind of also a requirement at the base station. You need to have the location of each call box designated on that base station. And then if all the calls can't simultaneously be displayed, you need to have a minimum of 8 active calls identified on your head end. So that's going to be where you have like a screen. You have to have at least 8 calls that can pop up at one time. Ours, I think, is 16 or something like that. But then you also need to have them in order of priority. So unanswered oldest calls first, and then you can also have the ability to mark a call, a specific call as urgent. Say maybe someone sounds really distressed, and you want to mark that as an urgent call and get to another call and send someone, to that location as soon as possible. You can do that on the master control station as well. The remote station needs to provide hands-free two-way communication. So it can't be like a handset phone you see in an elevator lobby of a hotel, for example, that calls the front desk. It needs to be a push-button speakerphone type operation so that people, even without full physical use of their hands or dexterity, can still use it. They can, elbow the push button. Call box example is like the one here on the screen with a nice mushroom button, so you can elbow it, headbutt it, whatever you need to do to activate that call box. And once you press it once, it's going to continue to dial until that call is answered. So here's an example. NFPA also cites that we need to have that direction or that location and instruction sign next to the call box. And here's an example of one. So push for help, raised letter in Braille, location designation. So elevator lobby, 14th floor, and then persons able to use the exit stairway do so as soon as possible unless they're assisting others. After activating the two-way emergency communication system, wait here for assistance. So pretty straightforward. There are a couple municipalities. Corey, I saw you're on the call. Denver has some special signage requirements, Denver Fire, and some of them are within our scope, some of them aren't. So if any custom signage or anything like that's needed, the end user or whatever has specific custom requirements, these can be made by a sign manufacturer, by the architect, and we don't have to supply these signs. There's no UL requirement or anything like that. So if there are specific requirements that we can't fill, then that will be the next step. As far as the requirements for NFPA supervision. This is definitely something that comes up quite a bit. And I think one of the more important parts of this system, because there are a lot of systems out there that are still being installed without this capability, all pathways between the remote stations and the master control station need to be monitored for integrity. So what does that mean? Well, if you lose a call box from the system's going to identify that call box being lost and it's going to go into fault. And when the system goes into a fault, it needs to be monitored, not only monitoring itself, but be monitored by a third party emergency system. So a lot of times the system is being integrated with the fire alarm system through an addressable fire alarm module, and indicating a system failure on the rescue assistance system. And that's going to be go to monitoring. So then offsite monitoring will be alerted of that signal, that fault signal on the system. And if there isn't a current emergency happening, the contractors can go on site and service the system so that it will be back up and running and will be a reliable system when it is needed. Also, part of that is all primary and secondary power supplies shall be monitored for the presence of voltage. Failure of either the primary or secondary power supply shall result in a trouble signal. And so, again, we want to monitor the power supplies. So, if we say lose our AC connection and the system switch to battery backup, we want to be alerted of that if there's not an emergency going on, because the system, after a certain amount of time, will no longer work. And so AC power is lost, you'll trip a relay. And then also with that, your secondary power supply or your battery backup, if voltage gets low on that, you also will be monitoring that part of it as well. So monitoring the system for integrity is definitely important to make sure that the system's going to work properly when it is needed. With that, the battery backup requirements have changed as well in 2022. So many of you are familiar with the current NFPA 72 battery backup requirements, which is 24 hours standby plus 5 minutes of all alarm notification appliances activated. Now it's 24 hours standby plus 4 hours with all remote call stations activated. So going from 5 minutes to 4 hours is a significant increase in the required amp hour capacity. In fact, we kind of found it about doubles the requirement for battery backup. So keep that in mind as your areas that you service start to change to that newer NFPA 72, the 2022 version, or when 25 comes out here soon. That is a significant increase in battery backup requirements. And part of the submittals often, part of the submittal requirements is often a battery calculator form to show that the battery that we have for this system that we're submitting with this system will suffice and meet those requirements, which the manufacturer should be able to supply that information. As far as the cable requirements are concerned, this is another hot topic, part of NFPA 72, and it basically states that these systems need to, the pathway survivability of these systems needs to match that of the fire rating or fire resistance rating of the building. So where the building is constructed with a fire resistance rating that is equal to or greater than 2 hours, the installation shall provide a pathway survivability of level 2 or level 3. Where the rating is at least 1 hour and less than 2 hours, they consider that a level 4. When the rating is less than 1 hour, they consider that a level 1. So a level 1 survivability is basically going to be running your cabling in conduit and making sure it's protected, a protected pathway. When you do have that 2-hour fire resistance rating in the building and you need to meet, for example, level 3 survivability, that's going to be accomplished with a 2-hour fire rated cable, CI rated cable, which there's some options out there, some UL 2196 options out there that can meet that from a CI standpoint. And then another option would be like a 2-hour rated cabling system. So your cable plus conduit equals your 2-hour fire rating, or running the cabling in a 2-hour rated enclosure protected area, which many of you are familiar with. If you have like a 2-hour rated chase or raceway, going vertical up the building, run your conduit, your cabling in that 2 hour rated area, and now you've met that survivability requirement. So those are a few options. Obviously, we want to make sure the AHJ is on board with whatever option we're going with. And also just make sure that the AHJ isn't expecting survivability when maybe it isn't necessary. And then we come across that sometimes as well. So best judgment there, but obviously, when in doubt, contact the authority having jurisdiction. Another part of this, which typically falls in the scope of the installing servicing contractor, is going to be annual test. So two-way emergency communication systems are in table 14.3.1 and NFPA 72 for periodic testing on an annual basis, verifying location and condition, making sure that the system's operating properly. And so the contractor should go in, they should test the voltage on the batteries, make sure the batteries are good on the system. Place some test calls on, minimum 5 call boxes in the building, making sure that everything's still calling down properly. Make sure that the calls will time out and call off site. Make sure the phone line's still activated. Make sure the monitoring account is still active. Just making sure that the system's operating the way it should on an annual basis, so that hopefully when it is needed, if it is needed, the system will operate the way it's meant to. NFPA 101, the Life Safety Code, also has standards pertaining to these systems. None of them really differentiate from what I've already gone over in IBC and NFPA 72, so I'm not going to go through all of this. But do be aware that as of 2024, they are requiring that newly installed two-way communication systems have a listing in accordance with UL 2525 and are installed within accordance of NFPA 72. So those requirements that we just talked about are required under NFPA 101, the Life Safety Code, as of 2024. Now, what is UL 2525? Well, this standard was written by code experts and basically determining certain system requirements for these systems so that they're as safe as possible. And so that listing can be approved by or tested by a nationally recognized testing laboratory or an NRTL, and those are recognized by OSHA. So these are going to be like your ULs, your ETLs are the two most common. There are a few other ones out there, but UL and ETL are the most common ones that we see out there. And they're going to make sure that these systems are meeting the National Electrical Code, that they're NFPA 101, 72, IBC compliant, to meet all those requirements we just talked about. And they even have further requirements for the systems as well, and we'll go over some of those. But testing variable voltage, so making that the system is can work under fluctuating power. Environmental testing, so temps, humidity, that sort of thing, impact, drop tests, endurance, so doing a lot of voltage testing as well as like button activations and things like that to make sure that will withstand a lot of activations. Electrical circuitry, audio performance, so making sure the system is clear audible performance and loud enough for the system to operate. Battery backup, mechanical function, polarity reversal. Those are all tests that the nationally recognized testing laboratory will do on these systems to make sure, well, for one, that they're not dangerous in the building, so that they're not going to shock somebody or start on fire, but also that they're a good, reliable system that will withstand a lot of wear and tear, and basically they're just not built cheap, and they're going to meet these standards. As far as functional system requirements that are in addition to what we already went over, some of them have to do with like restoration of trouble signals within 200 seconds in occurrence of the adverse condition, fault or restoration to normal. Differentiating tones between an emergency call, so the ringing for an emergency call, and then a supervisory or trouble signal, which would be probably more of like an annoying beep or alarm. Clearing a mute or fault. has to reactivate after 24 hours. So in other words, if your alarm's going off and you're servicing the system and you press mute on it, it needs to go off mute within 24 hours. Supervision of the power, monitoring of auxiliary power supplies is necessary, and then battery backup, as we talked about in NFPA 72. Some of the installation requirements include making sure that the control equipment, head end equipment, is in a locked room or cabinet. Typically, we're not going to see locks on the actual cabinet itself because the fire department has to access it. And there's not really a whole lot you can do from the call commander itself. Most of it is at the actual system controller. So as we're familiar with like fire alarm, you want to make sure that that fire alarm control panel is going to be in like a locked FCC fire command room or like a locked IDF so that the general public can't just go in and start unplugging wires. Because again, this is a life safety system. We want to make sure that it's installed with integrity. Um, Also, some of the other system operation requirements include like simultaneously broadcasting a one-way voice message to all of the activated stations. That's something that the fire department would do, basically just saying that, hey, we're in the building, please stay where you are. We're coming up to assist you out of the building as soon as possible. And that's just a good way to alert to all of the stations on the system. ID calling, we talked about that, IDing the call box location. Minimum speaker volume at the call box is 70 dBs at 1 meter. That's never been a requirement before, so it's good to see that audibility and that speaker volume is also being regulated so that it's not too quiet or it's not too loud that you can't understand what's coming out of it. The visual indication of the power is also a good feature that they've added. You can see the power symbol there. That would either be lit up green if the call box is powered up and in good status, or it would be lit up red if it's powered up and not connected to the system, or it wouldn't be powered up at all if there's no power connectivity to it, which obviously is a concern. So that's kind of a nice visual indication that the system's working the way it should. And then the 1 inch diameter of the button is another requirement. So rather than having a small push button that might be barely protruding from the call box, they want a mushroom button that it's at least 1 inch in diameter. As far as the components necessary, so you're going to have your system controller, which, as I stated earlier, is going to go like in your FCC, typically on the first floor, in a fire rated room, locked room, so it's not accessible to anybody. The base station or the central control point, that again is determined by the HJ where they want it to go. Typically, it's going to go at like an FCC if there is one in the building, or a front entrance lobby location where the first responders are going to go during a fire emergency. So those are the two most common locations for that. The call boxes, every elevator or bank of elevators on every floor above or below the level of exit discharge. So even basement level parking garages require a call box at that elevator lobby location. Accessible rooftop locations require a call box at those locations as well. Basically, anywhere someone could go using the elevator, and then if the elevator was no longer operating, could that person that is unable to traverse the stairs, could they evacuate the building? If no, you need to have a call box on that floor at that location. Power supply with battery backup, as we talked about. Signage requirements determined by the HJ, but really just that one location instruction sign next to the call box will suffice for elevator lobby locations. Areas of refuge are a different story, as we talked about earlier. Fire rated or pathway fire rating or survivability requirements. That's going to be like your 2-hour fire rated cable or your pathway ratings. And then offsite communication access. As we said, if that base station isn't at a constantly attended location in the building, which most aren't, the system needs to have a timed automatic dialogue capability to a monitoring location or 911. And with that, you have a few options. Analog phone lines, as we know, they're going away. So most are switching now to digital, which may or may not be a reliable communication option for a life safety system. Obviously, you want it to be backed up if the power goes out. Same thing with voice over IP. Is it a backed up network? Will this be a reliable communication option? And I think those questions and unknowns are why a lot of people are pushing cellular now, is because it is a robust, reliable platform, and that cellular dialer will typically reside on the same battery backup as the system. So it will operate for 24 hours plus 4 hours. And so that's really a good, reliable communication option. Plus, the contractor can provide that as part of the bill of material, which then they can control their destiny with all of the components. They don't have to wait for a phone line to be brought in or something like that to pre-test for their inspection coming up. So it can be a convenience factor as well, and cost savings. Typically, analog lines are two, three, $400 a month. In some cases, I've even heard $800 a month. Whereas cellular, you can get away with, 30, $40 a month. So they're a lot cheaper as well. The location of the base station, as we said, approved by the fire department, typically at like an FCC or front entrance lobby location in the building. And that's again going to be used by the fire department during that emergency. The call box locations, every floor above or below the level of exit discharge at the elevator, bank of elevator locations, or as we said, maybe areas of refuge. Otherwise, battery backup, and as we said, determined by the code. So either 24-hour standby plus 5 minutes or 24-hour standby plus 4 hours, depending on that code requirement in your area. And that's going to kind of determine how much battery backup you need. That's going to power up the whole system, though. So if power goes out, the system will continue to operate the way it should. And then the instruction sign next to each call box again. And then there may be additional signage depending on the AHJ that may say, hey, we want to have additional emergency communication signage with the international symbol of accessibility because it will help deter nuisance calls. We don't want people using it as, say, an intercom. So let's identify it more obviously with additional signage. If you do have signage and the characters on the sign are under 5 inches, which pretty much every area of refuge or emergency communication sign is going to be that, then they need to go below 80 inches from the floor. Any raised letter or braille needs to go from 48 to 60 inches above the floor. And then good industry standard for the base station is 60 inches to standard on the wall for when it's wall mounted. Otherwise, it may just sit on a desk. The most important one, if you remember any of these, is going to be the push button. So the push button cannot be above 48 inches. So don't even flirt with 48 inches. Go like 45 inches to the push button. Or what I usually recommend is 48 inches to the center of the back box. And then that way, that will guarantee that that push button will be below 48 inches. That is an ADA requirement for a person in a seated wheelchair location for a reach height. It's 15 to 48. Do not exceed 48. I wouldn't flirt with 15 or 20. It doesn't make a lot of logical sense. So typically, like I said, industry standard is about 48 inches to the center of the call box, which then the push button will be below that. The call box and signage location designation. This is just kind of a slide so I can show you good locations and bad locations for call boxes. So a bad location for a call box would be in between the elevators here, because you're going to have people that'll confuse the elevator call button with the rescue assistance call box button, and you're going to have more nuisance calls. Also, floor space. You need to have that 30 by 52 floor space for a wheelchair to park and for them to use that call box. So an opposite or adjacent wall from the elevators themselves is a better location for that call box, and typically what I'll recommend where you have ample floor space. Part of the inspection process too, and even annual checkups, is that floor space is clear of clutter. You don't want like a table in front of the call box or something like that. It needs to be accessible to a person in a wheelchair. So that's also an important part of it. So compliance, as far as these systems are concerned, it is required in pretty much every state and pretty much any type of building with an elevator with one floor above or below the level of exit discharge. Obviously, if it's a multiple story, say, apartment building without elevators, those aren't accessible floors above or below exit discharge. So you don't need to have the system. It's for buildings with elevators where you can get up or down to those levels. But then if the fire alarm system goes off, elevators recall, you're now trapped. The system isn't always recognized by AHJs. I would say we're at maybe like 50, maybe 60% enforcement throughout the country. So there's a lot of room to grow awareness of these requirements, which I think stems from the specifiers of the projects, making sure that it's in the plans and specs for the project. So then the contractors will bid it and it'll actually get put in the building. The big concern here is liability. If a building is constructed under a building code that requires this system, which, as we know, any pretty much any building now would require it. If it's not put in there and something happens, you know where they're going to go. So we want to make sure that the buildings that we're designing, the buildings that we're installing life safety systems in have this system, just like they have fire alarm, just like they have fire suppression, and those other life safety systems in place. This can obviously turn into a money issue if there's a lawsuit, but also if the HJ comes in and you're trying to get occupancy for the building, say a large apartment building, and oh, where's your two-way communication system? Oh, well, we didn't think we needed it because whatever the case may be. Well, now you're not going to get your certificate of occupancy, which can cost thousands of dollars a day for a high-end apartment building. So we want to make sure that the system's in there early. We want to make sure that the system's in there every single multiple story new construction building. So with that, that concludes the code portion of the presentation. We've got about 10 minutes left here for questions. So we'll go ahead and open that up. And then also I'll just share with you our contact information. So sales.us at avire-global.com is the best email to request quotes, POs, inventory, anything like that. Otherwise, you can see my contact information, Rob Chimperly. I cover the Midwest. You can see our other contacts here if you want to take a picture of this. That might be easier. Our website, avire-global.com. The US website, make sure you get to the en-us. You can find all this code information on the website, as well as data sheets, CAD drawings, specifications, all the information you need on our products to specify them or get information on them. And then last but not least, the QR code here, scan that. You can fill out an evaluation and you can request a certificate of completion for this presentation. And then also you can put in, if you are an AIA member, you can put in your AIA information and we'll automatically log that credit and send you a certificate of completion so that you have that for your documentation. Any questions?
Rob, we have one in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Can you read it to me?
Yep. It's, does the phone in the stairway for every fifth floor, should that be provided regardless if the doors are locked or not?
No, because then someone, if they go into the stairwell and they want to get out, they can just get out on their own. It's mainly for if you go into the stairwell and it locks behind you and you can't get out and now you're trapped in the stairwell. So only when the doors to the stairway are locked do you need a call box on every fifth floor in the stairwell. Any other questions? Feel free to reach out to if you do have questions, feel free to reach out to me via email. I'm happy to answer any questions or look at plans or anything like that. If you have a project going and you just are curious about what's required, we're happy to help with that as well. And then, as I said, most of our documentation is available on the website. If you can't find something for whatever reason, just go ahead and email me as well, and I'll try to get that information to you. All right. If there aren't any other questions, we will go ahead and conclude this webinar. So thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate it. And if you do have any questions or need anything, just let me know, reach out. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Have a happy holidays.